Hudson Taylor is a hero of the Christian faith. He was a missionary to China for nearly 50 years and set up what became known as the China Inland Mission, now under the heading of OMF International, a mission organisation still working in many countries in East Asia. And his legacy is of many Protestant churches in China that trace their history back to the days of his missionary work. And the book that tells his story was one of the first books of its kind that I read as a young Christian, and found its story in many ways inspirational. Hudson Taylor was born in Yorkshire, and at the age of 17 he underwent a profound conversion experience, becoming a Christian. And from the very early stages of his Christian life, developed a sense that God was calling him to be a missionary in China. That in itself wasn't easy to put in place, but in September 1853 he set sail from Liverpool as a Christian missionary to China. It was to be the work of his life. And again, lots of problems and difficulties to overcome. China wasn't an easy place for Westerners to settle in the mid-19th century, not always a welcoming place. He met and married Maria in 1858, and they lived and worked well together until she died in 1870 in China. And Hudson Taylor continued to work for many years after that, and in 1895 he was leading an organisation that had 641 missionaries. He retired in 1901 and died 4 years later. There are two things about Hudson Taylor that stand out for me in terms of his mission work. The first is a sense of Chineseness, if you like. Not a real word, but it sums up what he did. He set out when he arrived in China to learn Chinese so that he could communicate to Chinese people in their own language, so that they could hear about Jesus in ways that they could understand. And not only did he look to learn the language, but he set out to dress in Chinese dress. And so he tried very hard to become part of the culture in which he was working. And that sounds obvious and straightforward perhaps to us, but in its day that was revolutionary as an approach to Christian missionary work. And the other thing about Hudson Taylor was the deep sense of depending on God. There was no mission organisation back at home supporting him. There was no wealthy Christian in the background bankrolling his mission work. In everything he depended on God, and he didn't even write appeal letters to people saying, I need this amount of money to survive for the next week. He simply depended on God, and he prayed, and he wrote later about moving people through the power of prayer. And so he depended on God, and his work was very much classed as a faith mission because it depended on God, and he trusted God to provide for him in every way that he needed. And his story in the book is one example after another of the way in which that faith was rewarded, because God provided for him the things that he needed. God looked after him and gave to him the ways in which he needed to make the mission work that he was doing come to fruition. So he depended on God, and he looked to meet the Chinese people in the Chinese way. There's two things. These two things stand out for me as being the important things about Hudson Taylor and his mission work. And he later wrote these two things. He said, God uses people who are weak and feeble enough to lean on him. And he also said, you do not need a great faith, but faith in a great God. And these two things sum up Hudson Taylor and the way that he thought, the kind of faith that he had. And for me, these are the elements that make his story an inspirational story. Hudson Taylor, a hero of the Christian faith.